Greg, welcome back to Dad Edge. Good to see you back here, my friend.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
You bet. And now another book. So that's pretty cool stuff.
It's an exciting moment. There's lots to be grateful for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a book is a big project. It's not for the faint of heart. So I'm excited to dive into it. But hey, before we do that, you and I were talking before we hit record. And just to give the men some context who listen to the show, obviously it's a dad-centered show.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious about how you grew up. I know you had a full family. So talk to us about the mix of siblings growing up, what that was like.
Growing up, I was the youngest of 5 children, 4 boys and a girl. And it was terrific. I mean, we were just saying about there's lots of wrestling that went on. In fact, I remember I remember one time after dinner, this is when my eldest brothers were probably 17, 18, something like that. And there was a big wrestling match that took place between them and my dad, all friendly, all fun, but they managed to successfully pin him down on the table.
On the table?
On the table.
Wow. Okay.
And draw a smiley face on his stomach as like evidence of them having, the dominance of this moment. And I remember even then, as I was young, like I knew that the power had just shifted.
Huge thing to witness.
Was that?
That's a huge thing to witness.
It was a big moment to witness.
Yeah.
So now I'm married to Anna. We have 4 children. The mix is different. It's 3 girls and a boy, and so there is less wrestling.
Right.
But no one's managed to pin me down yet. But this moment's coming eventually.
Well, that was actually my next question. Has that experience now happened in your house, right? To where you're like, oh wow, this whole thing has shifted a bit. I was pinned down now, and this happened to me. So maybe this is like a generational thing.
We've wrestled quite a bit, especially in the pool. We'll wrestle together since they were very little, and it was like the dynamic has changed because in the early days, like my job is to, of course, make it fun, but I've just got to keep anyone from drowning all the time, right? So you're sort of always keeping them out of the water, even though you're dunking them and doing all of that. And that was sort of one experience. But as they've all got bigger, right? So they're basically all teenagers now. Like I am going to come out of that somehow. I'm going to come out bruised in some way. Like I'm going to come out pretty damaged. And so it's not for the faint-hearted now. They're not mean about it, but they're just clearly so much bigger now than they used to be and stronger. But it's been, I will say this, I will say that overall, the experience of being a dad has been much better than I expected it would be. And the experience of having teenagers has been much, much better than I expected it to be, because I thought it would just be, I don't know, pretty rough. And actually, I've been pleasantly surprised at how the investments that we made earlier on. I don't want to overdo that message, because I know like people have very different experiences, and I'm not saying every day is easy. Last night was like not one of my better moments, but just like as a whole, I think if you invest right, your teenage years can be a lot easier. As someone said to me recently, they said, actually just this morning, they were talking about being a manager, and they said hire hard, manage easy. And I feel like there's something similar to that with parenting. It's like if you invest hard early on, then parenting becomes, I think, a lot easier later on. And that's certainly been my experience.
It does, without a doubt. You've got me curious though. So what happened last night? And by the way, if it was something not so good, I am absolutely happy to share.
No, I don't. It's all within range. And if I didn't want to talk about it, I shouldn't have raised it. But I was. We just got back from a trip, and so we'd said, okay, when we get home, you got 20 minutes to unpack, put everything away, and then we'll go get in the hot tub together. And by the time, some of them did it within 20 minutes, we were done, and they were out there, we had a nice time. And some of them, which took ages doing it, that's fine, that's just no problem. But it meant by the time they came out, then it was late enough that we were like, look, everyone needs to take a nap. We didn't get much sleep last night. So, and we'll get lots of afterwards. But then it didn't work out that way. Like, it just didn't turn that we all were able to get back in. So then that led someone to be upset about it, their reaction. At first, I didn't even get drawn into it. But then when I saw the reaction, I was like, okay, gotta lay down the law a little bit here. And then that didn't go well. And so it just for like, I would say for half an hour, maybe a little longer. This conversation just went, conversation was like an argument. It did escalate. It didn't escalate to the point of damage of anything. Like, I don't mean physical damage. I don't think people came out damaged out of the argument, but it was just like so frustrating for everybody involved. There was so much misunderstanding. We still were making sort of some headway, but it got to that point where I said at one point, I'm like, listen, everyone just like take a break. We'll just come back in a bit. And I mean, I'll tell you what happened, honestly, is that somebody said, hey, listen, we should say a prayer. And we did. And it was like night and day. Afterwards, it was like everyone just totally were like, no, we know what to do next. Let's just make a plan for tonight. We're just going to do it. We're going to watch this movie. And we all did it. And we had a really nice time. And it was like, actually was night and day difference. So that's the story. But it just wasn't my finest moment, because I just felt like I became more defensive as the conversation went on, more frustrated about my being misunderstood. And I think 80% of relationship problems have people feeling misunderstood. So, that was the story.
Oh man, well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate you for sharing something. I put you on the spot there. But one thing I've noticed about myself and guests and just men in general is that we tend to really, really like people even more when we can relate to their true, authentic selves, right?
Yeah,
to
sure.
The good moments, the not so good moments, and I want to acknowledge and appreciate you for sharing that. And if I get it, I launched an online course called Creating More Emotional Resilience and More Patience with Your Kids, right? It's a skill set. And the week that I launched that course, I lost my patience every night. Yeah. Had those really not so great moments every night. And I'm like, what is even happening here? Yeah. I'm yelling, I'm reacting, I'm saying things I don't want to say. I just made a course on this, right? And yet here I am yelling. And then I did a live video in our community and on social, and they're like, dude, I love that. I love the fact that you're stating like, hey, these are skills, but they're not like going to make you impenetrable, right? We still it doesn't matter who we are. We're going to have these moments that we're just not proud of. So I love that, man. And good. And by the way, whose idea was it to do the pattern interrupt with the prayer?
It was one of the kids.
Amazing.
I don't remember which one. I think it might have been, maybe it was Eve. I can't remember now. But as soon as they said it, it was like, yeah, that's what we need to do. You just interrupt it, boom, and it was a reset. And the rest, like literally the rest of the night was great. And the child who had been most emotional and most, just said the things that kind of do still hurt you, as a parent, I think most children, teens don't really know that parents are people. Like even if they do, even if you taught that, which we have, it's like this, yeah, but you still only sort of are. You're still seen as pretty impenetrable. Like I can behave, and you kind of want them in a sense to feel that they can act out and life will be okay. That this is a place they can be a little crazy and feel emotional so that they can be intact out there when they're with other people and they're developing their life and so on. But the one that was the most sort of acting out twice before the end of the evening had come and specifically apologized to me. I actually wasn't even that good about receiving it, to be honest. I wasn't like completely dismissive, but I was sort of grunting in my response, like, yeah, it's okay. It's fine. I think maybe I managed like, okay, I forgive you. But it was like, what should have happened. And it took like my wife to tap me a second time, was like, and you apologize too. And that was like harder for me last night. I was like, man, I didn't initiate any of this. This is like crazy. And so it took like all of those conditions for me to like actually be able to manage it. And so I was tired anyway. When you're tired, you're less able to just be in your best place. And so, but I still was, the reason I even shared all of that is just I was impressed that she was able to express that so quickly after it all gone down. I mean, like that's what you want. You're going to get it wrong, right? I'm going to get it wrong many, many times again in the future. So are my children. So like we all are. So to me, forgiveness, repentance, like these sort of principles aren't the backup plan. They're not plan B, they're plan A. Like mistake-free living is a very bad idea. I'm not interested in it for myself. I'm not interested in it for my children. It's a very bad idea. And sometimes that's what we want, is to like have no mistakes as a person, no mistakes from our children. That the level of control that would be required to do that would be really violating to everyone involved. You want mistakes to happen. You want them to be as cheap as possible. One of the ways you make them cheaper, although I didn't model it super well yesterday, is like quick sorry, quick apology. And as I said, I think that was actually modeled better by one of my daughters than it was by me. But it helps you just to get back. You know, of course, it was easier to get back in a good place with them saying that.
2 life lessons that are really emerging as you share that story is, well, 3: honesty, humility, ownership, right? And for a teenager to acknowledge, I'm going to own this. I'm going to come up and be honest with you, and I'm going to be apologetic for my behavior because I know it was wrong. That's a very mature thing to do. And I'm not just saying this, right? Because I think when our kids emulate behaviors like that they are learning it somewhere, right? They're learning it somewhere. And so as fathers, we're super hard on ourselves. As fathers, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I teaching the right things? Like, I don't really know. Sometimes I'm my own worst critic. Yet our kids will do things like that to where you're like, okay, at the core of who they are, like that's pretty awesome, right?
I mean, the same daughter has talked to me before that, like, when there's altercations, that she kind of is living for it the moment when I'm going to say I'm sorry, like when I'm getting it wrong, when I've lost my temper, when I'm I don't mean freaking out, but like it can seem like I'm yelling to her, even if I'm not actually raising my voice, even if I'm not yelling. Like, I'm just, as a dad, it's easy to be dominant, even when you're not trying to be dominant, even if you don't feel dominant. It's just, you can have, disproportionate power. And so, but I love that when I'm getting it, when I've messed up the most, right? My main mistakes, that there've been enough times when there's an apology that she knows, okay, this isn't going to be forever. There'll be a point he's going to say, hey, listen, sorry for having handled it that way. That, of course you want to minimize the number of times you get it wrong, certainly in a certain way, past a certain level. But I think almost more important is how quick you are to put it right. And that to me is the health. The health is how fast can you get back to things are good. What's the speed of recovery is more important than never having it fail.
Right. Because as you said, I mean, mistakes are, they are the process. Yeah. It's not how do we live a mistake-free life or never do anything wrong, or it's what do you do with it at the end of the day? Like exactly what you said is, what do we do with it? How do we sit with it? How do we recover? Right. And what's that even look like? Because you're right. The recovery process is going to be more important because the avoidance of mistakes altogether is not possible. Right.
It's not possible. It will create a toxic culture. And so the question is, how do you construct a culture that makes it in a sense easy to make a mistake, but it's easy to fix a mistake.
Right.
You want that to be the culture. it's an interesting, what that puts me in mind of is a story that I came across in researching Effortless. It's not about parenting, but it can easily apply to it, to being a dad. And it's where this industrialist in the UK said, I want to create human-powered flight. Basically, he's talking about like a bike with wings. He wants to be able to get people to be able to fly like a figure eight around these two pylons up in the air without any engine. And this is just 10 years before people are walking on the moon. So there's like incredible aeronautical progress being made. And he thinks it's going to be pretty achievable achievements. He offers £50,000 to be able to make it happen fast. And for 17 years, no one is successful. There's all these well-funded, successful, otherwise successful teams taking this on, producing beautiful machines, and just everyone fails. 17 years. Enter Paul McCready, who's broke. He is a dad. The only team he has is his family. He gets his young son to be his test pilot. And he looks at the problem like, why has everyone failed for so long? And he goes, everyone's trying to solve the wrong problem. Everyone's been trying to build a beautiful machine that can do this figure eight and whatever. Like he said, the real problem isn't that. The real problem is, can you create a machine that can crash and be fixed fast and cheap? That's the real test. He says, as long as we can do that, we're going to learn fast, accelerate fast. And so they built this thing that looked, it just looked so amateurish compared to the competitors. But he said they would crash it, and within 5 minutes, they'd just stick a broom handle on this thing, tape it together, and they'd be up in the air again testing it. And so they would get maybe 4 or 5 tests in one day, whereas the competitors might only have 4 or 5 tests in the lifetime of their machine. Like over a year, 2 years, they would only have that many tests. So he was able to test cheap, and through 223rd attempt, they won the prize. It was the ability to have learning-sized mistakes that was key. And I think that is so true for parenting as well, right? We know that's true if you're trying to help a child to walk. We know that you want to create learning-sized mistakes. You don't want them walking in the middle of a road, to state the obvious. No, you want them walking where it's safe. If they fall, they're not going to hurt themselves badly. They're not going to damage themselves, not going to cut themselves. So you protect them in this way. That's the physical safety. So there's low physical risk, but then there's also low emotional risk. You want lots of safety around them, lots of support. When they fall, it's okay. We're here. We encourage you. We're supportive of you. And we know that that's how that learning takes place. This most remarkable ability to learn how to walk, that's incredible level of intelligence required. And we know the environment that's necessary to help them do that. But I think you fast forward into other phases of life, and it's easier to forget that process. You just expect, well, the teenager should know. Well, what if they don't know? What if you just because you know, or just because they're starting to look like an adult, we think that they must think like an adult, but they don't. And they're not there yet. That's why they still need you there. But to construct the same type of culture so that failure is cheap, so that there's a lot of safety, so that they come and tell you when they've made a mistake, that they're confessing it quickly. I stayed up late. I went and watched a movie and I wasn't allowed to do that. I stayed up late reading. It's 1950s problem, fine, but we still have it in our home where people are reading late into the night. We can't control that. So you want an environment where if they do, you come and talk to us. We tell them all the time about all sorts of, we'll list types of mistakes that you could make in life. And if you do, you just come and talk to us. We're not going to beat you for this. We're not going to shame you for this. Just come and talk to us, and then we'll work out what to do together. You want mistakes to be possible, but make them as cheap as possible so you can learn and progress optimally.
There's so much there to unpack. I love what you said, because a huge theme of what you're talking about is creating an environment of psychological safety where it's okay to take risks. And when you fail, not if you fail, you can land safely here, right? I had a previous guest who is a highly decorated Navy SEAL come on the show. And he said, if you really want to build confidence in your kid, number one, tell them failure is part of the process. Up the ante on the risk every time they try something new, as far as like when they do something for the first time, the risk is super low. Just get them momentum, right? The second time you up it a little bit more, then a little bit more, then a little bit more, then a little bit more, to the point to where then they realize that they can do whatever it is. And if they fail, they can recover with you maybe being a further distance out. Right. But also, yes, that you're the go-to for like, hey, I need support. Or I need to recover. I need you to guide me through that, what that looks like. Quick story, if you don't mind. I think that this might be appropriate. My 15-year-old ran a track meet last night. The track is very, very important to him. This is his first year doing it. He runs the 100, the 200 shot put and discus. He got last place for the first time in both the 100 and the 200. 2 out of 3 of his discus throws were scratches, and he was devastated. And I was like, hey, let's go grab a pizza. I took him out, and he vented to me, and this is your show, not mine, so I'm going to make this quick, but he vented to me. And basically what I said to him, I'm like, look, it's okay to fail, man. In fact, I would encourage you to fail faster. And he looked at me, he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, I don't want to fail. I was like, yeah, but it's part of the process. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about Albert Einstein. Let's talk about Steve Jobs. Let's talk about all these people that did great things in life. They all failed, but what do they have in common? And then we dissected it together. They failed faster, but they learned. They recovered, as your words, right? They recovered, they pivoted. They took the learnings from the failures and incorporated, how do I make that a success, right? Exactly like with the plane analogy. Like, it's not necessarily the plane and this flying object, is how can we get the flying object to recover? How do we repair it faster, get it back up in the air? And I was like, and then if you do win, how do you replicate the wins, right? And then the third one is, don't give up. The people that ultimately fail are the ones that step away from whatever that thing is ultimately, right? But I love that story of your kids, humility, ownership, the story about the plane and having to recover the plane. And then, that's how we grow confidence, right? Is creating those environments to where kids can fail. We're the safety net, and we can guide them, not save them, right? But guide them through a process.
Exactly. And to construct where we can opportunities for failure. I wrote a piece for CNBC that is also based in the book, but it's a story where Anna and I were, when the kids were younger, and we said, well, look, we were reading a book about finances and teaching children. I think the book's called The Opposite of Spoiled. And he has this suggestion, so we started doing it, where we would give our children an allowance. I hadn't grown up with an allowance, and some people are uncomfortable with that idea. Well, it's like money for nothing kind of thing, and we've done it both ways: chores where they get paid, but we were persuaded that at least for a period we would do just an allowance independent of work for this specific purpose, that they would get to experience money when the risks were low. So they would get not a huge allowance, but they would get this allowance, and we gave them 3 glass jars, and they would divide it between charity, or tithing in the first, second was short-term spend, and third was savings. And they could divide however they wanted. I mean, 10% was tithing, but then whatever else. And so then they started having experiences with it. And I remember my son bought this car that was advertised to be able to drive on the ceiling, and he'd seen it demonstrated, and it was very persuaded, $40 or something. And so he used up this money he'd saved up to buy this thing. But it was still quite a spontaneous purchase. Well, the thing broke within a couple of days. It just wasn't even. And then he didn't have the money to be able to buy a Lego set that he was really excited about. And so he had that disappointment. Do I want him to have that disappointment? Yes. And I want him to learn that before he's 25, he's 30, he's making a huge financial decision, and that's his first experience with money. So the risks are so much higher there. No, you want them to learn while it's cheap. You want to construct a life where you can try something and fail, and there's no problem. And childhood, I think, is a great opportunity for that, because because in teenagerhood too, like go try it. Well, I try to, and even from when my children were young, I've tried to not dumb down how I would talk to them. I would try to introduce mindsets and mental models and just describe the language, like the language of psychology, the language of economics, or the language, like whatever I was researching or studying myself, I would just try to share it with them. Of course, you have to figure out how to teach it to someone at various ages, but I wouldn't hold back in sharing those terms. And one of the terms that all of my children, if they were here now, they'd laugh or roll their eyes at the term asymmetric risk. And like actually teaching them what an asymmetric risk is. If you can construct something where the downside is minimal or zero, but the upside is high or limitless, you want to take that bet every day, because there's no downside. And what I think that they at least comprehend logically is there's so many things in life actually do approximate an asymmetric bet, where if you want to have more friends, then all you have to do is call more people up, because the risk is so low. Well, so what? So they don't want to come, or they come and you don't enjoy it. Well, the risk is almost nothing. That's hardly anything. It's a few minutes, a couple of hours in the afternoon. There's no risk. There's nothing. So trying to teach them, show them that the risks are low, encourages someone to take action, and what I would describe as the courage to be rubbish. Because you're going to try and you're going to learn, and then you're going to see what comes of it, and then you're going to try the next thing and going to learn. So asymmetric risks, I think, something that you can actually teach. This stuff can be taught, I think, to even quite young people. Can comprehend it if you teach it and you explain it a few times.
And one more time, I just want to make sure the audience heard what you said. Rubbish. What was it again?
Oh, the courage to be rubbish.
The courage to be rubbish. I love that. As you say that, I think that there's a lot of fathers out there. I used to be one of them. I'm not anymore. It's, oh my gosh. Well, no, don't try and fail. Like, don't fail for love. Do anything, but don't fail. Don't lose. Right. And it sounds like your mindset around that. And so is mine, is like, no, be risky, be courageous. It's okay to fail, but most importantly, let's recover and let's learn, right? We're learning machines. We are not perfection machines that never fail, right? So I love that, man. Thank you for the stories. I love where this is, obviously where we launched from. But I know you're here to talk about your brand new book, which, by the way, I loved your first book. And when you came, your last book, Essentialism, you came on and talked about that. Effortless. So first of all, what was the inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, well, let me answer that question specifically. So we moved as a family into a new, pretty idyllic neighborhood. This place was built in the 50s. It's like the whole world moved on, but no one told anyone here. So it's like white picket fences. It's more horseways than roads. There's no street lamps, and it was just like this great place to be raising our children. And they really thrived in it. They're out taking walks. They're taking the dog on walks. They're playing tennis. They're swimming. I mean, it's just like great. And one of my daughters, Eve, especially seemed to thrive. She just loved being barefoot in the back garden. She's naming our chickens. Yes, we have chickens. She's always climbing trees. She's reading. She's articulate. She's funny, and she cannot stay angry. If she tries, she just bursts out laughing. Right, this is Eve. Brown hair, blonde brown hair, brown eyes, slim, mischievous grin, and all of that's working until she turns 14, and then she just sort of started slowing down in everything. She'd slow down in her chores. She'd give us kind of shorter, instead of giving us like 10 minutes of just an endless talk, it was like more like one-word answers. And we were like, well, pretty age-appropriate behavior, really. So we just we're not going to worry about this. But then on a routine physical therapy visit, she failed a reflex test, which they can't really fail reflex tests. And so he pulled Anna aside and said, listen, I think I would go to a neurologist. I don't want to alarm you, but I think I would. And so, of course, you don't have to be warned twice. So we, went immediately. And then looking at her behavior from a different perspective, we suddenly saw it differently. Well, what if this is part of a bigger medical challenge? And it was. I mean, it was neurological condition, undiagnosed, basically. For months, no named diagnosis, because every test came back in the normal range. Meanwhile, her capability is just like being just free fall. So she takes hours to eat a meal, takes 2 full minutes to write her own name, 45 seconds to write 3 letters of her name. She right hand side of her body is just doesn't work at the same pace as the left. Personality gone neutralized. There's like emotions within just a very limited, really no emotions, but very, very limited emotional range, and on and on. And this whole time, the neurologist cannot give us even the beginning of a diagnosis of like what really is happening. And so in the midst of that, I really discovered that there were 2 paths, 2 ways to approach this. We could take a difficult situation and make it worse, or we could take the situation and make it lighter, an easier way of handling it. And it might sound obvious which path to take, but actually what we felt inclined to do was the first. I mean, it's like, pull all-nighters reading, every kind of diagnosis people send. Well, maybe it's this, and could it be that she has, and could it be the other? These, non-medical professionals, but just people well-intended. We could blame life. We could curse God and die. We could ask why us. We could get consumed in the depression of it all. I mean, you could destroy yourself, your marriage, your family, and with it, any chance of actually being able to help, because you're using up all the assets you need to be able to help. But that was still the temptation, was to take that path. And unfortunately, we sort of stepped down this other alternative way of living, right? Where we're being grateful for anything and everything we can, like relentlessly so. If you complain, after you complain, you say something you're thankful for. We got around the piano and sang. We laughed together. We focused on what we could do something about. There was like a whole different way of living that we suddenly discovered was possible, even in the midst of this, that was necessary for getting through it. And I think I could just summarize this by saying that it wasn't enough to do the right things. You have to do it in the right way. And by finding a new way of doing things, we found that there was like an almost magical force at play, and it buoyed us up. And so we were compared to what we could have been, it was like an almost, it was a state of joy. I don't use that word lightly. And that's what sustained us as we went through this process. That the first was 4 months before the first any round of treatment. I mean, no one was even offering any kind of treatment. So 4 months to them. But then after that was successful, the symptoms returned. It ended up being like a 2-year journey as of this conversation. And probably a little longer than that now. And so if you just take it in the most exhausting path, you're not even going to make it. You're not going to even survive the longevity. You don't know how long it's going to be. So you've got to approach it in a certain way, a particular way. I call that now effortless, right? I call that a way of thinking, a way of being that eases life's inevitable burdens. And out of what started as a necessary way to survive, how to keep as a father, to keep things intact for my family. I learned a lot of principles, of practices, and then realized, I don't think it's just me. It may be, other people, fortunately, aren't only rarely dealing with a teenage daughter who suddenly has neurologically discombobulating condition and disease, but other people are dealing with challenges all the time. And so I realized that it was worth going on a sort of quest of research to understand what would the mindsets and the skill sets be for helping with all of the normal difficulties of life. How can we approach that? Effortless grew out of that experience and then that research. So that's sort of the story behind the new book.
Oh my gosh, man. My heart seriously just feels a ton of gratitude, man, just for talking to you right now about this. Cause what you just did, especially a podcast so centered around such an intimate situation and very, very hard situation, physically, mentally, emotionally trying for not only your daughter, but you and your wife and the whole family unit. Right. And to be able to, in that moment or that period of time of darkness, right. And no one would, everybody would let you off the hook for yeah, man, this is really hard. Be upset, be angry, find the negativity, right? No one would blame you for doing that. Right. But in the same moment, in the same breath, you're finding ways, in your words, to elevate this situation in your life, right? And to do it effortlessly. So let's really speak to this skill set systematically, right? So can you share an example of where maybe everything was just stacked against you, your family, or maybe in your business, to where you felt incredibly challenged, but you were able to implement this effortless strategy of, sounds like relentless gratitude, which, by the way, I love that, relentless gratitude. How would that show up for you, in a situation?
Well, let me just give a little bit of structure on the model that grew out of this experience, right? Is three related levels: state, action, and result. Effortless state. How do you get into an effortless state? How do you get into a place of being at ease, especially when life is really hard? So it would be natural to get into a state of suffering, of complaint, and so on. How do you get immediately back into an effortless state? I'll answer it, one or more ways to try and start doing that. But the key is that getting into the state really matters, because out of that state grows a different kind of action, a whole different way to do. And out of that comes a whole different way of getting results. Results start to flow to you. And so the state really matters. It's it's the most important thing. You got to keep coming back to it. And the moment you're not in an effortless state, which is very often, you say, okay, what do I need to do to get back in that effortless state? What's the fastest, easiest way to get back there? Now, I've mentioned gratitude. You've picked up on that. That's one of the ways to be able to get into an effortless state. You can't be fearful and grateful at the same time. You can't be angry and grateful at the same time. So if you can, it's an accelerated path to interrupt your state, to say something you're thankful for. And I think I mentioned it specifically, but one of the things that we discovered is this simple habit recipe, right? After I complain, I will say something I'm thankful for. That's it. That's the recipe. Now, here's what I learned when I started doing that, is that I complained so much more than I realized. And I think of myself as a pretty positive person, quite optimistic. And yet, as soon as I actually paid attention and had this little habit, I found I complained about just all the time. It's just a flow of complaint. Small complaints. Oh, yeah, that meeting took longer than I thought. Or, oh, I'm concerned about this thing. Oh, I'm worried about that thing. And you walk into a room, you catch the children, you see what they're doing wrong. Why are you on that? Why are you still on your phone? Why aren't you getting this thing? Get back onto that. And that becomes the state of your life without ever realizing it. The state of your dadhood. That's who you are to people. That's how you're showing up. And so this simple interrupt, this simple, fine, complain, keep complaining. Don't at first try and get rid of all your complaining, but every time you do, one thing you're thankful for. And the effect is literally instant. There's not much stuff in life that really is instant. This is instant. You just go do it. Then the very next time you just do it. Oh yeah, that meeting took longer than but I'm thankful that I had the meeting. Thankful that that opportunity is taking place. Next time you see the child, well, why are you on your phone? I'm thankful that you're here and that you're my daughter, that you're my son. You see the effect will be instant. People will reflect, will have a positive reaction instantly, and so will you. It'll improve your state. And state is not independent. State affects the action you take next and the type of results you get. And so as soon as you improve the state, you will start to see these other things improve. So even in this catastrophic situation that I was in, or at least what could have been catastrophic, it still had an impact. Gratitude is a catalytic thing. It's not just a good thing. It's not just a nice thing. It is a causative thing, and it produces an upward spiral. And so we've done it with our children even now, where I remember once my son, I think we've implemented it with them as well. And so he complained about something. I'm like, okay, give me 3 things you're thankful for, and he says, just like this, he says, well, I'm so glad. I'm so thankful that Dad wants to play this game, but we have to say something we're thankful for every time we complain. He said it just like that. And we all just laughed. And it worked even with that temperament about it. It didn't matter. That's how powerful it is. It just works. And so when we start getting in a grumpy mood, we're on some road trip, or we just start doing it. I've just started recently doing it where if somebody is critical to each other, which again, so those patterns happen, and they happen. There's not a day that goes by that people aren't critical with each other in our family. But as soon as they do, okay, what's something you're thankful for about them? You're fine. You did the critique, but now you've got to pay it back. Let's at least get to an equity between the two. And let me just summarize this with a single principle, which is that what I found is that when you focus on what you lack, you lose what you have. And when you focus on what you have, you gain what you lack. And that's really the power of this idea of there being 2 paths at all, is that one, you're going to lose more and more. It's going to get heavier and heavier and harder. And the other, you're going to start gaining, developing assets, improving the relationship, improving the culture around you, improving your sense of optionality. And that all prepares you to be able to do better with whatever the next challenge is that comes in life.
Man, I'm so grateful for this conversation. I really mean that. Honestly, man, I really, really mean that. I've done 700 interviews now to date. And if you look at gratitude practices out there, right? And I'm one of them. I love doing my morning gratitude. I have never thought until you shared this whole concept in your book about doing a gratitude practice in the midst of feeling absolute defeat and negativity. Mm-hmm. And then making that the trigger to do so, instead of like, oh, it's morning, I need to list my 3 to 5 things that I'm grateful for, and then I'm kind of done with it, and I'll do an after action review at the end of the day.
Right.
But what happens in between is the meat of the day, and the most important, it is absolutely the most important times to practice that practice. So taking the themes away, making the feeling of complaining or negativity the absolute trigger to then step into gratitude is what you're saying.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And it fits with another theme, another practice in the book, but I don't want to make it too complicated by combining these, but there's a difference between a chore, a habit, and a ritual. And the idea here is, if you can, right, chores are the worst. Chores, we want to avoid chores. They're unpleasant, they're uncomfortable, and we'd rather run away from them. Okay, so that's a chore. A habit is something that may still be unpleasant, but you've actually got into a routine. So it's easier because you've done it many times. And you do it because it's habitual and because of the outcome you want later, right? That's a habit. And there's loads to be said for habits. But there's a distinction between a habit and a ritual that is really helpful. A ritual is a habit with a soul. A ritual is something that you enjoy doing in and of itself. So you want the outcome, but you also want the experience of doing it. That's a ritual. That's what's so exciting about it, is that what if you can take something that's a chore and not just make it a habit? What if you can take something that's a chore and turn it into an enjoyable ritual? it's a complete game changer. And to illustrate it in my dad life, right, it's we have quite a lot of positive rituals about dinner together. Like we eat dinner together, I mean, sit down and eat, not every night, but I would say like 75% of the time. We are actually sitting down together, and we like toast each other at the beginning of the meal. We do like different cheers for each other. Like we've really tried to do it. Sometimes it's a disaster. Many times, it actually works. But I'll tell you what the problem is right after dinner is my children are like ninjas. They are like silently gone, right? It's time to clean up and they're gone. Right? Like somehow, it's a great meal. It's nice. It's positive. Cheer for whoever's made the meal today. And then it's over, gone. And it's like, what? And now my job is cat and mouse, bringing them back, let's make this happen. And it's a chore, right? That's what we mean by a chore. And even if let's get it to a habit where at least we're doing it every night, that can still be miserable. And so I said, okay, how can we make it effortless, right? How can we make this, a better experience? And one of the things we did is, okay, well, we just got a sheet of paper, Sharpie, divided up the roles and responsibilities. What does done look like? Got clear about that. Who's doing what? Okay, we divide this up. We train what's minimum acceptable standard. We get the whole thing. It's all trained. We're ready to go. Thursday arrives. This is launch day. Let me tell you what happens. Nothing. They just go back to how it was before. It was Ninja City again. Everyone's gone. And it wasn't until my eldest daughter, Grace, added basically karaoke music. Like just loud Disney songs is how it started. Put it on loud. Songs like, I don't know, Let It Go.
Let It Go,
yeah. Right. It's getting mixed with the Beatles' Let It Be, but Let It Go. And it's like, it's just like, I Can't Wait to Be King from Lion's King or whatever, like all these, and just put it on loud that, like someone starts singing, you can't not basically, because it's just so like, it's infectious. And so like everybody starts dancing and they're doing the job. And that was the thing that was the tipping point. So it was and the question that I think goes along with this is like, well, can we make it fun? Can we make if we're going to do it anyway, can we make it fun? Can we find an enjoyable way to do it? And now it's like a little party. And whenever we forget to put the music on, it like immediately becomes a chore again. And it's like, oh yeah, we got to do it. We got to clean up now. But then as soon as someone puts on music, it again triggers that. And I thought, well, people won't believe me. So the other day when they were doing it, I took a video. I wasn't even there helping them, but they were doing it. The music was on, and I captured a clip and I put it on Instagram. And because I was like, this is for real. It really worked. Loads of fails in my life, but this really works. And so that's an example of how you can turn something from a chore, not just into a habit, but into a ritual that's actually enjoyable in and of itself. So you get the job done, but it built your culture and it built your experience, and you look forward to doing it the next time. So it's another practice I think that can be helpful.
If anybody wants me tonight around 6:30, I will be dancing in my kitchen with my family as we clean up. I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is absolutely huge. And I've never heard that again of all these shows, chore, habit, ritual, and what each of those mean. It makes total sense. I'll share a quick example back to you. And this is like my own, imperfections. And sometimes I'd show up terribly. My witching hour, I wake up at 4 a.m. every day. My witching hour is usually between like 8:45 and 9:30. Like I'm so tired, I don't even know what to do with myself. Mm-hmm. And it's within those 45 minutes, we have my 15-year-old, 13-year-old, but we also have the 7 and 5-year-old. That's when my 7 and 5-year-old, they want to read books.
Right.
I love to read, but at that point in my night, I just want to lay down. But what I have found, so there are times where I look at that as a chore because I'm like, right. I just want to go to bed. Right. There are times where I look at it as like, well, it's a habit and it's good for them. We should read, so we should do it, right? Because and I even wrote it down, we want that result. The ritual, though, here's where I have found joy in doing that. And I force myself to do it, but it's that state change you're talking about. And you know what, even as I say it out loud, it's the gratitude state change. Mm-hmm. Because the moment that I'm like, I just want to go to bed, I'll look at the color of my kids' eyes, or I'll hear the sound of their voice as they read, or I'll listen to how they laugh when we get to a funny part. Right. Or I think about like how I was literally thinking about this last night, what my 5-year-old felt like on the right side of me as he leaned his head up against my arm. And I thought to myself, there's going to come a time where he's taller than me, or there's going to come a time where he's not going to be right here anymore. So I'm just going to, as we read Green Eggs and Ham, I'm thinking about this. And it was immediately that state change, but it didn't emerge for me what that actually was until you just explained it. Right.
Well, I love that example. And it's a great illustration of like being in this state changes the experience. The experience actually changes because you're paying attention to those little things in the moment and seeing that the extraordinary exists in the mundane. If you're paying attention to it, it's right there. That is the life. That is the richness of your life. It's not the future. Something's going to be meaningful in the future. It's like, it's already here. So I love that example. It begs one more thought for me, which is just, and maybe you already do this, but I found that my day as a dad has 3 like acts to it. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, morning, afternoon, evening, right? And my experience is that morning is easier than the afternoon, and the afternoon is easier than the evening. So that evening is the period, and unfortunately, that's the period often where we spend the most time together with family, right? That's like work's finished, you're coming out, that's where you eat together, let's go to the bedtime routine. And so you can show up at that exhausted. And it really is hard because exhausted state is not an effortless state. An exhausted state is close to a state of suffering. I mean, it makes it so hard even to read a book. I mean, we're not talking about Anna Karenina here. We're talking about like Green Eggs and Ham, but even that really is genuinely hard. Like I'm with you on that. I know that feeling. And so there's a couple of things I wonder about that might be helpful. One is like building a nap into your schedule, and I don't know if you do that. I'm not really holding you on accountability.
I keep hearing people say these things called naps. Like I don't.
A lot of people think of them as quite childish, and the overachiever doesn't want to do it. But I've found I've been napping less recently because of the book launch. So I've sacrificed that more often than I had previously. But even now, as soon as I feel that sleep burden grow, I'm like, I'm just going to take it right now when the moment comes. I can feel it. Don't fight it. Don't power through it. Just your body is in, follows rhythmic cycles, not just through the night. We know about those, the REM cycles and so on, the 90-minute cycles we go through in sleep cycles. The cycles continue all through the day. And so we shouldn't fight those. You got to learn how to use them. One of the ways to use them is when you get into that sleep burden grows, you just go, I'm out. I'm just going to go close my eyes for a few minutes. And that gives me a burst so that I turn up better for the final act of my day. So that's like one concrete thing. Another thing that I found helpful, especially in the pandemic, is to have an exact time that my workday ends. So I chose 5 o'clock. I was inspired by someone else who did the same. I did the same thing, and he'd read Essentialism, got into it, and I write about his story in Effortless. But it's Ben Bergeron, who works with like the fittest people in the world. He's like a high performance guy, highly disciplined guy, and he just chose a set time to be done. So even in the pandemic, once I heard he'd done it, I wasn't doing that before. But when I was like, okay, well, I want to be inspired by this essentialist. And so I'm like a town crier. I walk out of my office and I'll yell out the time to the family as my accountability. I chose 5 o'clock, not because I chose it because of like just self-awareness that if I went later than that, dinner went later than that, then all these other cumulative problems, right? Where you're more exhausted, everyone else is more exhausted, everyone else gets hungry, and you're just making that last act of the day, that much more unpleasant, much harder than it needs to be. If I leave at 5, I can help with dinner, I can help get people together, help them get going, I can help tidy up. All of it works better. I'm doing that when I've still got some energy. So that's one more thing. And then the final thing is just having a done for the day list. Which is a little different than having a set time, but to design your day at the beginning of it. I don't do this every day. It takes a bit of thought to do this. I haven't got into a good enough routine to make it effortless yet, but it's where you really say, look, when I've done these things on this list, I can feel satisfied with being done. After this, I'm not going to be on email. I'm not going to be online. I'm not going to be doing sneaky work, right? Sitting in the hot tub while you're on your phone, doing work. I'm going to be, I'm really going to be able to say, yeah, that was good and sufficient work for today. And so those are 3 suggestions I think that can help with that last act of the day.
I love those. It puts what we like to call containers, right? Those boundaries in there and I've been doing the end the workday at a certain time for a while now. That's super helpful. It also creates an incredible sense of urgency.
Yes.
And if you want a whole lot of urgency, it's like tie those things that need to be done most to that time that you're going to be done no matter what, and you'll get things done. Right.
Well, you don't keep trying to solve problems with just more hours.
Right.
You say, I want a higher contribution, but I don't have more hours in my day, because I'm not going to go into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 2 in the morning. I'm not having more hours. So you have to solve it in some other way. You have to solve it through delegation or better prioritization, or just literally asking, what's the effortless way to achieve this? Because that question itself, we know there's questions or answers. And if you ask a better question, you're going to get a better answer. And I know of almost nobody who asks the question, how can this be effortless? And certainly I never did. But once you do, it's really quite remarkable how often answers will come to you that you're like, well, that really would be effortless. That would be an easy way to do this. And I've just been constantly thinking, you tend to think, most people, especially overachievers, tend to think, if I want better results, I simply have to work harder. If I want to double the results, I have to work double the hours and double the effort. And that's because you're just simply saying, how can I work harder to achieve these results? Well, your brain will give you answers. If you ask a better question, give your brain a better option. How could I achieve this result in half the effort? How could I make it effortless? We had a printer that we'd replaced our printer. And I had the responsibility to get rid of the other printer. And so it's in my office, been there for 2 weeks. Every time I look at it, there's a little cycle in my head. Well, do I sell it? I don't really know where to sell it. Do I give it away? I don't know who to give it away. Do I throw it away? I don't know where the digital recycling unit is. It's just like, that's enough effort. It stays on the floor in my office over here. And then I ask a different question. How can this be effortless? And literally, as soon as I ask the question, I look up and there's some workers like down the ways a bit outside. I don't know them. And I was like, well, I wonder if they want it. And so I walk out. Do you want this printer? It's in working condition. Yes. Walked in, got it, gave it to them. Within 2 minutes of asking the question, I didn't just have a solution, it had been executed. And I'm like, that's, you can say that's trivial, but like life is made up of printers on the floor. It's made up of tasks to do. And we are doing it often a harder way because we're asking questions that produce a harder answer. And if you ask a better question, how can it be effortless? How could I make this enjoyable? What's the minimum number of steps to take that would be required to execute this? On that last one, I have a story on that too. That's a bad story, but I don't want to monologue here. But
no, you're good. You got full attention, man. I'm loving this. Please.
Thank you. My son Jack set a goal to get his Eagle Scout before turning 14. He was 12 at the time. And that is a stretch goal. It was important to him, so it was important to me. And it became like our goal together, that we're going to try and work out how to do this. At the time, he was probably a little behind where he would need to have been just even on a normal schedule. So this was like, as I say, a stretch goal. And we did a variety of things to try and make that experience enjoyable. We did camping together. We got other people involved. I mean, there's a whole series of things. But we actually got through everything, including the final Scout project, which was an amazing experience. And the last piece of it, at least the main day, was effortless. We had probably 35, 40 people turned up. It was like in the most amazing scene where we built this 180-foot fence, painted it all, like everything done one day. And it was like, pretty magical. Okay, this is where we're at. Now, for anyone who's scouting, that isn't the end. That is emotionally the end, but it isn't actually the end. The end is you've got to write up a report about your Eagle project. And that last piece is enough to keep people from getting their Eagle. I know someone personally who did everything but that report for, like, they went all the way to like a day past their 18th birthday to hand that in. And there's zero tolerance for 1 day past your 18th birthday. You have got to do it by the time before you turn 18, or they didn't. And he never accepted it. He never got it. And like this is like, he's still young. He's got years left to do it, but we start procrastinating it. We're like, well, every time we think about it, so much. And then we start saying, well, what is making this so hard? Like, we're not doing a darn thing. So it's not the task itself that's hard, because we're not doing anything, but we still feel exhausted every time we think about it. And we started to realize, well, we've seen some of these reports. We've seen one that's absolutely magnificent, built in a wooden box, glorious, in size. This is hundreds of hours of work has gone into this thing. We'd seen these things on display. And so in our heads are just burdened by all of this second mile stuff that we've seen other people do. And it's just too much. We just go, oh yeah, we just give up before we've even begun the task. And so instead we just ask different questions. Well, what does done look like? It gets you to the Scout office and they've accepted it. That's done. What's the minimum number of steps we need to be able to achieve it? What's the minimum, not the maximum? Maximum, we're never going to get there. The minimum number of steps. Okay, we need a 3-page essay, no more. 3-page essay explaining what this experience was. And we're going to have some photographs and one line underneath explaining it. And we suddenly realized there were lots of things that we were thinking we have to do that were actually just, well, other people have done it. We could do it, but all these second mile stuff, and we're like, not everything takes a second mile. So we reduced it, we simplified it. Then we said, well, what's the first physical step? Well, the very first obvious step is to get a 3-ring binder. It's not the 50th step of actually handing the thing in. The first step is get a binder. Well, we can do that. And then it started to feel achievable after that, because when you break these things down, there's a moment where physically you change, where you go, I can do that. When people say that phrase, I think I can do that. Their body is in an effortless state. They're able to take the next action because they know what to do and they can do it. And that's what we started to feel. And so we were able to actually take the next little step. And so within 1 week, we'd done it. It was delivered. It was completed. He graduated. He got Eagle Scout 1 week before his 14th birthday. But we wouldn't have done that. It wouldn't have worked if we tried to do it, overthinking it, overcomplicating it, over-engineering it, over-extra-miling it. We'd have just never got there. And it would have been less enjoyable. And maybe we wouldn't even achieve the goal. And it would have gone on for years, and all that unpleasantness of procrastinating something. So it's much better to make progress in like a streamlined approach than it is to be perfectionist about it and make no progress.
Yes, especially with men. Men are extreme. We're full throttle or no throttle beings. Like, I'm going to either go 100 or I'm not going to get in the car. Right. And we tend to overcomplicate things. Well, if I'm going to write a book, it's got to be 500 pages. It's got to be 50 chapters. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. It's got to be all these things, right? Instead, no, it has to have these 3 lessons in it, right? And then how do I even make those lessons even simple? The last and final reflection is, when you said that, how do I make this effortless? And then we're in that state. I literally felt like my physical being. It's almost like before you jump off the high dive as a kid, or do something big or drastic. It's like, I can do this. I'm ready. Right. Even if I try and fail, I'm still ready to move forward. And it's that feeling of like, okay, right? Man, I love how you wrapped all these amazing lessons in your book through obviously the stories that you share, because that's how we as human beings, we learn best, right? Is through story. And I absolutely want to make sure that all the men can find your book. I mean, obviously on Amazon, but I want to make sure, where else can they find you, book, everything else you're doing in the world?
I think if they went to one place, well, if they order Effortless right now, they can go to essentialism.com and they get for free a 21-day essentialism challenge. And that's like a masterclass. I mean, they can buy it anytime, but right now they get it for free. So that's one thing. And then, you know, of course, Effortless is out, as you mentioned it. There's a podcast, the What's Essential podcast. That's another free resource, and started that just a few months ago, and really enjoyed working with people to show how to apply these ideas. So those are some of the resources that are available to people.
Well, guys, we're going to have all the links in the show notes for this particular show. Greg, this was so much fun. And just as a teaser, you got another books in the works, or at least on the mind here?
I do, but top secret for now.
Right. I figured you were going to say that.
But I do have one. It's been great being with you. Thank you.
You as well. Gentlemen, for all the show notes to connect with Greg and his amazing work that he's doing in the world, go to gooddadproject.com/320 for this show. Again, gooddadproject.com/320. Greg, thank you so much for joining. It was so good to talk to you today.
Thank you again.
Back at you. Gentlemen, go out and live effortlessly. See you soon.